Okay, so I just want to get straight into it. I saw a clip saying, like, it's one of the guys defending Trump saying, oh, you don't think if Trump was on the list that Biden would have released it? And my answer is, no, not necessarily, because the point is this list, or these people that Epstein worked with, were a blackmail operation, and they wouldn't be just blackmailing one side of the camp. They'd be blackmailing both sides of the camp. So that's the first thing we need, and this is part of the whole issue, that both the left and the right, because they're not just in America, because again, this operation would be carried out all throughout the world, need to get into the heads that the people that are actually causing the problems aren't necessarily on one side of the house or the other. It's that they've got control of the system itself. The second thing that we also need to be very carefully about is that a lot of people come through and you start watching these videos, and some of them are very, very slick and they're very well funded, and they're like, the hypocrisy of Donald Trump won't show us the list. But when you really listen to it, what it is it's just anti-Semitic, right-wing Nazi crap, and I won't have anything to do with that stuff. I'm sorry, but people who are involved, I've learnt my lesson. Be involved in the National Front, you're not going to change your spots. You're still going to be a neo-Nazi scumbag. And I don't play with that particular group of people. And nobody has to. Because the second aspect of it is that, yes, again, this enterprise has very much control over the Israeli government, and through that position, it makes them basically buy all these weapons and use these weapons and, again, push this particular agenda, which is mostly against Iran. Which is my next point about the Epstein situation. There's a lot about the fact that there's a lot of very influential Jews that are on this list. But again, if you listen very, very carefully, one of the things which is not shouted, definitely not by Tucker Carlson, and again, it's like, he keeps on doing this, like, oh, I'm the reformed Tucker Carlson, and then things come up about things, his attitudes towards gays, and you're like, nah, you're still that same repulsive scumbag. No, they're still right-wing, and this again, that right is getting very clever at reading the room and coming across, and I've seen, like, I've actually experienced, I was a victim of it into a certain, and I hate to use that word, but I experienced it in 2010 when basically a lot of that far-right money, unbeknownst to me, was actually funding, basically libertarian or liberal causes, such as my work with Vinnie Eastwood. And initially, they were lying things anti-TPA, against pro-legalisation of marijuana. And then slowly you start to send around about Christchurch 2019 when I stopped working with Vinnie, because I became aware that some of his money was dodgy, and went, sorry, bro, I'm out. Sorry. They basically start to load in all this other far-right agenda stuff. So there's that aspect to have to worry about. But when we're looking closely more about the issue of the list itself, like, let's break it down. There is actually if you go and look at the stuff about Wexner, and that's the guy that ran the Victoria's Secrets cabinet, there's a lot of very stuff around that, basically around people that were working with him and their branches into different elements of the government, and it gives you probably a very good shopping list of the kind of people that were basically being brought. And again, the list is very simple. It's people involved in bureaucrats involved in the security apparatus of the United States government, or people involved in the banking apparatus. And again, you look at the Epstein in terms of the relationship he had both with JP Morgan and Barclays. Now, JP Morgan and Barclays are also very significant, because JP Morgan and Barclays, along also with Citibank, Deutsche Bank, and Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, all main branches based in New York, and have been basically the kind of ground zero where all the dodgy money in the United States, the oligarchs in Mexico, all ends up in New York. And where it goes from there is actually $64,000, and a very important question, but I don't know the answer, because the public trail stops at New York. And, these are banks that have been done basically with massive money laundering. Again, JP Morgan, the $20 million case they got up there with a ship they owned the ship that had $20 million of, no, it was even more than that. It was the world record for cocaine in the United States. And again, what you're seeing, again, if you follow the flow of money, is that these same banks are all involved in it. So to me, on the outside, it looks like someone's capturing the major head of these networks, and pretty much we're saying, well, you're going to bank what we want you to bank, and probably do the same thing with the intelligence apparatus. You'll spy on this person, you won't spy on this particular person. And again, everyone's focusing on Mossad. But backtrack again. If you look at very carefully, like the false passport that Epstein actually had was basically for Saudi Arabia, and his work in New York, which would also help him launder a lot of money into the New Jersey part of town, with very affiliated with Donald Trump. That was actually being done on behalf of the Bank of Credit Commercial, BCCI, and I'll come back to them in a second. But the key thing was that money was being laundered through the New York real estate market, for BCCI, but basically through Adnan Khashoggi, who was the front person for the Saudi Arabian government. And again, these are very much the people that have been sort of in bed with Israel, and they've been largely kind of using Israel to basically attack Iran. And the simple reason is that because I always get these back to front. So the point is the difference of religion, not necessarily the name I give it, but one is Sunni and the other one's Shia, and they don't get along. And Iran Saudi Arabia would really like to see Iran gone, because then they would get to be the big swinging dicks in not just the Middle East, but the entire BRICS area. Now again, Saudi Arabia is part of what they call Vision 2030, and this is again, Helen Clark was actually in her United Nations very much, she was used as a puppet, and she's actually come out and turned around and said, yeah, the United Nations has been hijacked by corporations. I'm kind of interested to know where she's kind of drawn her conclusions. Maybe some of the dots I put out there have rung in mysterious places, but the point is, she got largely convinced to kind of go along with this Vision 2030, and it was kind of put out this idea that this was going to make Saudi Arabia and United Arab countries, more egalitarian, more diversified, less misogynistic, and more pro-democracy. In actual fact, through the death of Jamal Khashoggi, who was tracked using Pegasus software, which is basically very much the same kind of spin-off. Pegasus and Palantir, basically a spin-off of a system of intelligence basically designed by Admiral Poindexter of the Iran Contra affair, called Total Information Awareness Network. A Total Information Awareness Network, basically, it's what that's what Palantir. Palantir is the kind of the civilian version, because they tried after 9/11 to take it to Congress. Congress said, no way, not this technology and not you. So, Pegasus and Palantir are deviations of Total Information Aware, which was the digital arm of Rex 84B. Go and have a look at that up, because basically Project 25, which is basically the blueprint for a kind of very conservative, religious, almost Saudi Arabian variant of Islam, but for Christian version of it, has all come out of the Heritage Foundation, which again, very much heavily funded by friends of the Ronald Reagan administration, including the Saudi Arabian government. And basically, the kind of, Trump has disavowed all knowledge of Project 2025, which is kind of not really that different from Agenda 2030. In fact, it's, Trump talks about Freedom City. Peter Palantir is now talking about Freedom Cities, which are, we talked about the 50-minute cities, and the left went, no, that's all conspiracy theories. Well, it turns out now that they're listening to Freedom Cities, they're now more open to the idea. But back in my day when I was saying, hey, look, it's not the United Nations. Don't believe that it's a communist conspiracy. That's all John Burke's nonsense. Look at the corporations behind it. These are the ones that are basically driving ideas behind support behind Agenda 2030 or Vision 2030, the Saudi Arabian version, which Jamal Khashoggi got killed, revealed that it was actually blueprint to basically use smart weapons, to basically so they didn't have to worry about, their own troops turning on them. They could use it to mass surveillance. So, pretty much what we're now worried about with Palantir. And, Saudi and Israel's going through their own version as well. And again, everyone's blaming the finger at Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu, and they're looking at Epstein, and they're looking at Harvey Weinstein, and they're looking, all these guys are going, Jew, but they're not actually recognising, well, maybe these guys are actually being basically black. And let me put it this way, Wexner gave away his entire fortune. He let Epstein basically do whatever he wanted with his entire fortune. Does that sound like a person who really has a lot to say about? No, it sounds like someone who's got them by the ballsack. And again, we know Harvey Weinstein, not justifying when he had his own armies, but and I'll go back to that in a second as well, but he was using his armies to spy on people, but because he himself was being handled and controlled. And in the case of Harvey Weinstein, what we were seeing there was actually Black Cube, which is they were using Pegasus software, and Black Cube is a derivative version of Cobweb's technology. Now, Cobweb's technology, and again, I'll come back to these guys in a second. Cobweb's technology, you find them not only working for the Texas Department of Immigration and also working in Portland before the attempted assassination on Donald Trump, which managed to leave not one single burn. He didn't go screaming. There wasn't blood all over the place. Quite an amazing. That really is the second magic bullet we've seen involving an American president. So that same company, Cobweb, they're involved here in New Zealand. Again, you look at the newspaper reports, and it includes Immigration, the New Zealand Business, NZBIE, the New Zealand Police, and one other agency at least. And I think it's the Immigration turned around and says, oh no, we didn't use it. But then you find other reports earlier where they said they were actually using it to model software, so they got caught out in a lie. So we've got we've now got them. It's the same situation we've got appearing in the Trump situation, where they're telling lies that are so blatantly obvious. There is no list versus the clip with Pam Bondi. Oh, it's 60 Minutes. That's where it flips over, even though we've now actually had it examined. It's been examined forensically and shows that yes, a minute has actually been doctored off using, I think it's an Amazon software footprint. But the point is, there's left a forensic trail. So there's this super obvious stuff, and yet we've got people telling us bald-faced lies because someone has them by the balls. Now, all of that does come back. I admittedly, again, look at Israel. If you look at, for example, the Iron Dome, one of the first targets the Iranians actually hit was the Microsoft building in this sort of big industrial plant. And once they took that out, suddenly Iron Dome didn't work too well. So, again, there's another example of this collusion. Again, we get with Alex Karp being sworn into the military of Palantir. Let's go back to when all this real estate money is going for New Jersey, and we've got Donald Trump sitting on the boat, which is the dancing here. Now that's the boat that turned up here in New Zealand in 2020, and I tried to get everyone to pull it really, really close, because it didn't just pull up to New Zealand, it pulled up next to boats that belonged to Google, boats that actually turned out the dancing here itself belonged to the Rupert Murdoch family. So the Murdoch, about the Robert Maxwell relationship with Mossad, in terms of he's very much linked to being the source by which American software Promise, which again is the seed Total Information Awareness Network, which became Palantir 2.0, basically, and Pegasus drew off the back of Promise, which was basically, I think it was Hamilton, a guy called Hamilton came up with it. The Justice Department stole it, and then got basically sold to all these private enterprises. And the key people that were actually involved in this whole situation, again, all these people involved in the Iran-Contra affair, and these are the people that branch out into things like the Heritage Foundation, which is very much tied up with the Donald Trump administration. And Edwin Meese, he's very, very important to Rex 84B, and he's the guy that Donald Trump gave the Congressional Medal of Freedom to. So again, what I'm saying to you is a lot of these Iran-Contra names are coming up. And again, the correlation between them and Israel actually is BCCI. And again, we find before Abner Nadal, Patrick Steele wrote a book called Abner Nadal, Gun for Hire. And in that book, everyone denounced him, because he was suggesting that basically terrorists were actually hired mercenaries, and they weren't terrorists, but they were basically doing what their highest bidder told them, and they were being run by, shadowy organisations in the background. Everyone went, oh, that's bullshit. And then BCCI collapsed, and it turned out that Abner Nadal organisation was one of the assets that were being paid, and they were paying into people that were known to be Mossad assets and people that were known to be CIA assets. And basically what it turned out was BCCI, the Bank of Credit Commercial International, basically were running their own private intelligence operation, including 28 different states. And they also had fingers into guys like Secretary John Tower. Now, John Tower was a senator for Texas who was the muse for Margaret Thatcher, the son of Margaret Thatcher, who nearly got Margaret Thatcher to become the head of BCCI, which would have been offered the ultimate protection. You literally would have had this rogue bank hidden right bang in the centre of English empire. And see, that didn't happen, and did get exposed, but it instead, something like $2 billion disappeared and got never recovered. And BCCI didn't really no one went to jail. A few people got sacrificed, but the organisation itself stayed largely intact. Very much like organisations like Propaganda P2 in the 1990s, same thing actually happened, and again, there are lots of overlaps between those particular organisations. But BCCI fell over for $2 billion, and they were kind of where Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United States all mix. And the problem again was that it was a perfect three-way mix, because if one person blew the whistle on another one, then the other one had the secrets to basically have the gonads on them. So we had this sort of precedent of blackmail at the beginning, it's part of the model, hey, we're going to do this thing, we need to know that you're on board, so we need something that can compromise with you, and then that way we know you're loyal. And it's become it's a very old technique, but this is basically what we're up against. So the whole idea, what I'm basically trying to say, is that the idea of pointing fingers at Israel and using this to go around and attacking Jews is equally ridiculous as to point the finger at the Catholics or the Saudi Arabians. I mean, in fact, that's a good example, like the old example of the mafia. Like, yes, sure, everybody in the mafia is a Catholic. It doesn't mean that everybody who's a Catholic is in the mafia, and this is vice versa with the situation with what we're dealing with the situation in Israel. Sure, call out the military-industrial complex. Let's call them Zionism for the want of a better word. I don't think Zionism actually means, in that context, really means the origin, because that's a whole different history lesson. But from the viewpoint of saying that when we call around and we call someone Zionist, what we're doing is we're not attacking Judaism. And I can see a lot of I'm an atheist. I think all religions are a little bit kind of kooky, the idea of, but that's my belief system, and I'm not going to project it. So from when I examine it, I see lots of very beneficial things about all religions, and I don't think the idea, once we turn around and we kind of start pointing fingers at each other's religions or belief systems, I think we're doing exactly what they want us to do. So what we need to do is we need to call out the exact names, individuals, the corporations that have physical addresses, and not kind of put these into blanket organisations, which then become like you're chasing the tidal windmill. So, recap. Epstein dies, and he has links to the royal family. And he has links to the banking cartel, and I mean the royal family means that he also links them into that kind of Tory establishment. He has links into the banking cartels. He has links to people like Harvey Weinstein, who in turn we know are basically kind of using these private Israeli organizations, which the key thing here is private. They're not really part of they are running their own particular agenda. They are free agents, and the idea of public-private, this is the first thing, what to do about it. Get rid of all public-private relationships. The private relationships have no business in national security issues. These are security for everybody, not for the security, and that's what it always inevitably becomes. So we know that. So basically, from them we can branch from those things from basically Black Q. We can break those into Pegasus, into Palantir, and those basically lead us back to total information awareness, and total information leads us back to Rex 84B, and Rex 84B basically is the idea of using natural phenomena, natural emergencies, not necessarily to create them, but using the opportunity to basically kind of do mission creep and steal, spend a few more money on the military-industrial complex, erode a few more civil liberties. Same thing you can do with a pandemic. You can do that with a terrorist event. It doesn't matter. The key thing is making an opportunity out of crisis. The second thing is to utilize this, using an opportunity to push for these mass surveillance. So again, in New Zealand, we want to have the Atlas network, which is again this regulatory body made up of very much private mining companies that the more you look into it, the more they get into the same nefarious world of black, dark money. And again, you get like the Christchurch Foundation links us back to Neil Jacobson via the fact that that's the partnership to the Christchurch Foundation. Christchurch Foundation is the organisation that received that $11 million from the Christchurch shooting, and when anybody asks them questions about where the money it gets incredibly very vague, and the Christchurch City Council really has stepped way back from that foundation because, again, I've been poking a few things and enough to get people listening. And basically, we turn around with an organisation that when you go from Neil Jacobson, you lead right back into this sort of Heritage Foundation, Iran Contra, kind of guys. And again, the Heritage Foundation, the Tel Aviv Foundation, the Alan Humphrey Rolliston, who was the partner to Alan Hubbard in Southern Christchurch Finance, is the chairman of the Christchurch Foundation, and he was the business partner to Alan Hubbard, who was involved in the Paradise Papers, which take you to South American ferrous metals, which then leads you to Robin Sylvanus, who is a member of the, it's a think tank. The think tank is called... God, it'll come back into my head, but this particular think tank is very, very influential in the United Kingdom, and again, it's basically using both the left wing and the right wing to create a situation where it's got a mass surveillance state happening in the United Kingdom. It's the foundation. I will put a link when I put this website. The word will be in the gap below, and it's actually it's a very significant organisation. So I do apologise for the mental block. And this is how it begins. But yeah, we have basically another example there where it said $11 million disappears. We used the situation curse, so we created all these new laws about social media and censorship, and we Christchurch, there's Jacinda Ardern, the woman who gave Chris Luxon, basically appointed him to run the ministry into why did New Zealand fall over because of bad management. When Chris Luxon was in charge, and then he turns around and appoints her at $700,000 to run the Christchurch call, and everyone who's steered up and been made to, lovely selfie opportunities and stuff that really goes for the heart, without actually explaining to people that the partners of the Christchurch call are the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which again, part of the Vision 2030, which has told you the case of Jamal Khashoggi, utilised that, basically used this idea that it was all about inclusiveness and stopping hate to actually entrench the patriarch and basically bring about the handmaiden tale 2.0. So it was doing the exact opposite. And again, it's working with all these corporations that we're convinced in the aftermath of the Christchurch call, we should be able to trust private corporations to look after our data. How's that working out for you all, huh? So, recap of the recap. Epstein, Jimmy Savile, pick your particular call all around the world of the history. These are the fixers. These are the guys, and there's a guy who runs out of Queenstown, again, very much tied up with the Five Eyes community. You'll often find him hanging around the White House brothel in Auckland, looking around for sleazy types and being very generous with his money. So this formula... actually, the guy I'm talking about did used to work for the White House, but I can't go any further than that because then I'll get myself in trouble. So, but I've given you just enough clues, breadcrumbs to look for it. But these guys turn around and they basically, catch people who have got deviant behaviour, and this, I'm not kink shaming. I'm fucking, I'm great, whips and chains, whatever you've got. But the difference is when you start doing things that are non-consensual and you get someone willing to give you that, and then basically you let your want get in the way. And again, if you look at, for example, in Auckland, there's a place called the Candy Club, and if you look across the road around that area and start looking at some of the offices, you'll find some very influential people across the road from the Candy Club. But if you're going to get yourself in these situations where you allow yourself to get filmed, and again, it goes back to Queenstown. I remember, I did the stories basically about how they found these miniature cameras in Candy's strip club, and I've written about this, explained about, how these were advertised in the Mountain Sea newspaper, the gang members that actually bought them, and that the two girls that worked at this club, one was known as Pearl and the other one was known as Lisa Blakey, and they found out about this and they did a runner in Lisa Blakey's history. Basically, she wasn't very good, and she ended up the guy that basically got done for his charges was a gang member, and he basically got told to take the rap, is my angle on it. And we look at some of the police officers that were involved in that case, and some of the police officers that were involved in the Ben Hope Olivia Smart case, and we look at some of the police officers involved in the Louise Nichols case, and we start looking at, say, some of the police officers involved when 17,000 rounds or 25,000 rounds of ammunition disappeared from the Dunedin Pistol Club, and how they got so few of those ammunition and the guns back, and who they were involved in. And you start finding the same names, and guess what? Some, they leave the police force, and suddenly they're running luxury cars, or they've got fleets of yachts. And wasn't there a bunch of marijuana being grown not too far on the Durwell Island and the Aries launch? And didn't the guy that was running that, Alistair Castle, wasn't he suspect? Oh, that's right. Wasn't he the guy that also hired that really guy who was really good with doing backdoor computer stuff in Dunedin with Michael Swan, was it? And yeah, you're starting to get this organisation isn't just about the United States, and it's not just about Democrats and Republicans, and it's actually, the issue is what needs to be exposed is basically there needs to be an audit. And in the United States, I'd actually recommend, if somebody wanted to be serious about it, I'd go for the Government Accounting Office, the most uncompromised organisation, amazing record, and they are, tailor fit, and that's what we don't have in New Zealand. We don't have that, and we don't even have an internal affairs. In fact, Jacinda Ardern goes to the United Kingdom after Operation Tiberius, which is about basically a shadowy club that's infiltrated through Blackmail, the Old Boys Network in England. And they bring her in to investigate this, the outcome of this with Sir Ronnie Flanagan, who's, the fixer. He's the Jimmy Savile for the Tony Blair government. And he's also a member of one of these Old Boys Network. And then she turns around and says, you should use the New Zealand police system, which is the system that William, anyway, he wrote the book Stone on Duty, came out and said he got on tape with Gibson, who's one of the guys that gets named in the Royal Envy as part of this Dunedin detective culture. saying, well, no, the IPCA is just to whitewash us. It's not to protect the citizenry. So that's what she sells to and then she gets a postgraduate, handshake afterwards, so paid by the Old Boys Network. It's just, this is what we need. We need an audit to clean out. No, you cannot belong to any secret organisation. It takes you. No, you can actually, if you swear an oath, if you're going to join Parliament, you can only have one passport. You can't have two passports. Like we've got 40% of the people in New Zealand Parliament right now weren't born in this country. And I'm not. It's not an issue about immigration. It's about you can only have one master because of vetting security. So we need to go in there. We need to turn around and say to people, well, look, actually, when you do take a polygraph, if you're in a sensitive position, every year you take whether you're left wing or right wing or whatever, you take a sensitive polygraph. And some of the things we ask you is, since you've joined up this organisation, have you got yourself compromised? Have you joined any? These are the things that we need to come up with a set of checks and balances so that we can actually counteract the situation, because ultimately what we've got at the moment is the vast majority of leadership is completely compromised. They're now, of course, from that recruiting people. I mean, just look at the Greens Party, gone from Jean Fitzsimmons and Rod Donald, the biggest mana in Parliament, to, it's like, oh, look, there's another Green person being caught doing something incredibly dodgy or shoplifting, self-entitlement, and then getting kicked in. And it's not, I'm not picking on the Greens, because you can find that same disgusting behaviour of entitlement in the Labour Party. And again, we all know about the youth camp fiasco, and then again you can Google the National Party and again, and the ACT Party again, very classic example right there. So just before the Parliament, the ACT Party guy gets done for basically paedophilic behaviour. All the people in Parliament will be known about it. We don't get told about it because nobody thinks that's relevant for when we're voting about whether we should be, have this knowledge about what the ethics of the people are, and only gets found out afterwards. And if you look very carefully behind all the screen, it's both sides are very lip service to actually say, no, we want to get to the truth about what actually is going on here. There could be a social welfare issue. But this again, the systems, the issue is the systems, the checks and balances are lacking, and it basically means that once you get past a certain privilege, nobody is being allowed to look at you. And again, Peter Williams says in the book Stoned and Dirty, when he talks about the entire point, it's because nobody believed that police corruption could occur in New Zealand, because again, our culture of egalitarianism and all the things that we worked very, very hard to, which we're now rapidly losing, it happened. And in the English case, it's very straightforward. I'll quickly sum that up, because all that happened there was, in the United Kingdom, they had all these huge issues, which, 30 years later accumulated in Operation Tiberius, which I said afterwards, Jacinda got to do the review and they just whitewashed it. But and this will come out again in another 30 years, no doubt. But early in the 1970s, they got to a point that was, even the police chief of Manchester, I think he thought he was a swan, it was like, they were like Doolalali. And so all these guys that had been kind of enabling whatever, they were, or recognised as being corrupt, they were perfed out, and they went into the Australian police force, and they went into the New Zealand police force, and they went into Canadian police force. So again, when we look at the Cameron Ortis situation, where a lot of the guys turn around and say that this intelligence analyst who was analysing a lot of this dodgy money was protected on high, and they'd made several warnings, they're probably correct, because this system is entrenched, but it's not, again, one particular country or one particular culture. It is an issue of there's probably lots of little cartels out there, and collectively, and they're probably even blackmailing each other. That's how sore this is. But the issue is we need to crack this open and expose the worms inside the apple and plant an entire new apple garden. And as I said, my belief is we need organisations, we need a system of auditing that isn't about no, I'm sorry, there is no about. It's not about personal left wing or right wing. It's just every year in local council, this is what we do. We go through the books and we actually look at it. And it has a process and a committee which again is vetted and secured to ensure that privacy and secrecy is, and privacy is protected and that secrecy is not compromised. But at the end of the day, everything needs to be actually examined, and without any system of internal affairs, there is no one to watch the Watchmen.